Hello, everybody. We have another wonderful Patreon article. It was submitted in January by Sonny Diaz, who's a new Patreon supporter. Sonny, thank you so much for supporting the show, and this is awesome. And it's an interesting article written by an independent journalist, John Lourdes.com. Sonny is doing what you can. This is at the $5 level. Anybody out there, if you go to the Patreon link below, you can submit articles like this, and I will discuss them, and we'll go into the topic. So what this article is really goes into kind of the history of policing and why we have such a problem here with cops. The title of the article is All Cops Are Bad, How Modern Policing Negates Moral Responsibility. It's a very in-depth article. There's some pretty solid research in it from what I can see. The link is below, and I highly recommend reading the entire article. I'll go into some of the highlights. First of all, I just want to give you some statistics that are in the article. So in 2017, United States police killed 1,132 people. 1,100 people were killed by U.S. cops just in 2017. So it's like this guy calls it state-sponsored terror, which it kind of is. And what the article goes into is the history of how we got here. But first, the first part of the article focuses on Daniel Shaver. There was body cam footage of Daniel Shaver's murder. It was released in early of December of last month, December 17, right after the officer who murdered him walked away with no conviction. A day after the video's release, Oklahoma prosecutors chose not to file any charges after a deaf man walking with his cane was killed when police fired a taser and 5 bullets into his chest, pelvis, and arms after he failed to hear them shouting at him. Also during the same week, an 11-year-old black girl was held at gunpoint, handcuffed, and stuffed into the back of a police cruiser by officers who were searching for a middle-aged white female suspect in Michigan. Meanwhile, an unarmed person was being shot to death in San Francisco by a rookie cop on his 4th day. Right? So, the history and origins of the police, one that talks about a tale of two law enforcement paradigms. The type of policing that exists today first emerged in France during the 1700s, and the earliest use of police officer only appears in the USA in 1794, while the first known use of police station is from 1817, just 200 years ago. The concept of policing has existed for a long time, of course, but these cops are something else. Long before police institutions of today were established, policing was mostly a grassroots enterprise. In pre-industrial Europe, the law was usually enforced by volunteer watchmen who formed local groups, known as the Night Watch or simply the Watch. And so police departments were initially formed to serve the community, right? People are committing crimes, and we need someone there to enforce them. What has happened in America in the last 30, 40 years, but really in the last 20 to 30 years, is the militarization of the cops. And that's what to me is the scariest thing. And then when you get cop after cop after cop after cop that's acquitted, it's kind of terrifying to think about this. And I was having a discussion back in October with a very good friend of mine who's a cop. And you know, he's not all like, we're all right. I mean, he understands as a cop what, you know, some of the complaints are. And when I was explaining to him, I said, you're a cop, so you have your badge on you. So if a cop comes up to you, you can say, I'm a cop, and the cop will back off. I go, that power, and we're sitting in his place. I go, a cop could come in here, kick the door on, and tell us to get down, and there's nothing we can do about it. We have to comply, and if we don't comply in the slightest, or even if we comply completely, we could still get shot. Isn't that terrifying? And he's like, yeah. You know, yeah. Now, my friend brings up the point of, you know, what's never talked about in the news is the cop that rescues the kid from the abusive environment. The warrants he served, my friend works in internet crimes. He's arrested pedophiles and arrested them. And he's like, what about these bad people that are arrested and then they're prevented from committing more crime? That's a valid point. But when you have these kind of statistics, like over 1,100 people were killed by police, I mean, obviously it speaks to the gun issue that we have in this country. And the excessive use of force. But it's really, to me, it's the as this article calls it, a government takeover of policing, right? And what is starting to happen is and it started in the 18th century, but in the last 30 years, and it started with the big war on drugs, right? In the 70s, when the crack epidemic hit in the 80s, it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. And what came with the crack also came with a lot of weapons. So police departments had to get tougher. And so there isn't this massive drug problem like the crack epidemic. We have definitely drug epidemics, and there is in this country, but crack was an insane thing in the 80s. So that's when it really got, that's when at least they used the justification. Now crack was brought in by the CIA. We know this. So I wouldn't be, they used it to fund the Contra, it's crazy what America has done. So let's talk about kind of what this author calls the negation of moral responsibility. And this is the problem of modern policing. Police were no longer organized as a response to the needs of communities, but as an instrument of state authority. With government officials deciding the scope and extent of policing practices, watchmen became employees of the government, and ordinary citizens no longer had any control over the police. There should be civilian oversight. That's one of the things I've heard talked about a lot in terms of reforming the police. There needs to be civilian oversight. Police departments are just sort of autonomous, and that's why they always protect each other. There's a shooting, and we got to back the badge, and there needs to be civilian oversight. A watchman's authority could be challenged if they pissed off too many peasants, because it was the peasants who organized the patrol to begin with. This is talking about the history. The authority of the state, however, is trickier to challenge. Today, the police are military hierarchy organized in a chain of command of captains, sergeants. Patrols do whatever their superior officers say. Those officers do whatever their superiors say, and so on into the bureaucratic abyss. To be a part of the police, officers must obey orders, just as members in any military must. Since failing to obey orders is a pretty quick and reliable way to leave the police force, cops who disobey orders are pretty rare and only employed as officers very briefly. Moral agency is the ability to know whether an action is right or wrong. For example, if a bear kills a person, there's no moral issue because that's just how bears operate. But if a person kills a person, they need to hire a lawyer because people typically have more options than bears do, which means they can be held responsible for their actions. Murder is not just killing. Murder is having a choice not to kill and killing anyway. Without moral agency, there is no murder. In fact, the whole idea of justice assumes that moral agency exists, which is why most legalist systems do not prosecute kids or folks with certain mental illnesses. If someone lacks the ability to do the right thing, it is pointless to punish them for doing it. This is where this article gets really interesting. Modern policing deprives cops of moral agency at a structural level. With a militaristic chain of command as the institutional core, moral responsibility for the actions of individual officers is transferred to the abstract spook of governmental authority. The result is that nobody can be held responsible, and the officer becomes an inanimate tool in the spooky hand of an unseen, unaccountable bureaucracy. The police officer becomes no more than a vessel for policies totally devoid of agency and free of its consequences. And without agency, there can be no accountability. There can be no justice. That is an amazing point. And then the article goes into why all cops are bad. Yes, every last cop is bad because it doesn't have this moral responsibility. I don't know that I agree with that, quite honestly. But this is a really great point to bring up, is the moral authority or the moral responsibility is devoid because the infrastructure, the bureaucracy surrounding it removes it. Man, that's a great point. And I'm curious to know what you guys think in the comment section. And this is what John Lourdes says at the end. And none of this is going to change either, not until more of us have had enough, not until our courage to speak out against the police is greater than the social and political pressure to deny that the problem exists. Not until more of us are more offended by cops shooting kids than someone saying, fuck the police. Fuck the institution of policing. Fuck the structural mechanisms that rob police of their humanity as much as they rob our mothers of their children. And even if your brother-in-law or insert family member relative is really a nice person, when they wear that hat and badge, fuck them too. I don't know if I agree with all of that. Sonny Diaz, thank you for submitting this. But these bring out great points. And having talked to some former cops who have come out and are advocates for police, changing policing, going to more community policing. I think there needs to be more civilian oversight, for sure. There needs to be more community policing. Because right now, cops are just trained to just gun, and they get down, and they're screaming at you, and you're just like terrified, and then they shoot you anyway. And this is a dangerous situation. So we do need full-on reform. We need police reform, and I appreciate this article being submitted. So I really am curious to hear what all of you think of this. And Sonny Diaz, thank you for bringing this up. I like talking about these subjects, even if I don't have I agree with most of the stuff that's in there, most of the statistics. The fuck all the cops, they're all bad. I don't know if I subscribe to that, but we need to really protest more and really vote for change. And we need politicians that aren't afraid to say we need police reform. You know what I mean? It's like politicians are afraid to say we need police reform. They're afraid to say we got to cut the military budget. They're afraid to say we need gun control. They're afraid to say we need free, universal health care. They're afraid to say those things. And so we need to back politicians that aren't afraid to say those things, because that's when change will happen. And this is something I talk about a lot on this show, is how you can affect change on a local level. You all live somewhere where there's a local police department, a local police agency. So see how you can get involved to affect change on a local level. Thanks for watching the show.